First of all, just so everyone understands, I'm trying to do my fiduciary responsibility as a council member. That's why I'm asking questions, so I better understand it. Thank you. And I read it very thoroughly, and I have some questions that I'd like to go over with you. So thank you. The first one I want to ask you about are the two investments. One of them is in Wachovia, and one of them is in Merrill Lynch. Are you familiar with those two that I'm talking about? And what I want to ask you about, one of them, and so everyone can understand, the one of them that's Wachovia Global Securities. Am I correct? That's now Wells Fargo. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then the Merrill Lynch one that's listed here is now Bank of America.
That's now BofA. That's correct.
That's BofA. Okay. At the time the Wachovia was purchased and the time that the Merrill Lynch was purchased, correct? Would you be so kind to tell me what the S&P rating was of the Wachovia?
Wachovia, Wells Fargo was AA. It's now a Wells Fargo obligation of the Wachovia.
The Wachovia one was an S&P AA?
The Wachovia wrapped in Wells, which is now a Wells obligation, it was AA, correct,
The S&P, was the Moody's also a AA rating, Mr. Jeffries?
I'm sorry?
Was the Moody's also, there's two ratings, the S&P and the Moody's. Was it?
I believe in the Wells case, I think Wells has 3 AA ratings.
So the S&P you're saying was a AA and the Moody's rating were both AA?
I believe so.
You believe so? Okay.
Our policy says NA, so that's a single one. It says AAA, but the point is you don't necessarily have to have 6 AAs.
Okay, so you're saying one of the two was AA. You're not quite sure if it was a rating of AA in both the S&P and the Moody's?
In the case of the Wells Fargo, all 3 of the ratings were AA.
Okay. And
on the Wells Fargo.
Okay. And how about, can you explain to me on the Merrill Lynch?
On the Merrill Lynch, now BofA, all were rated A. That is the item to which the mayor referred.
Okay, it was the one item. The other one?
That's correct.
Okay. And that's the one that is $2 million. Okay, $2.8 million. Do you normally check the ratings of the bonds prior to purchase or the notes?
I'm sorry, would you?
Do you normally check the ratings prior to the purchase of what they are the day you're purchasing them?
I normally know them. I believe we slipped on this, and earlier this year, when we talked about liberalizing the investment policy with a couple members of the Audit Commission, there was a little bit of pushback about making a blanket downgrade. But in discussing it, we saw no problem with an occasional A rating, especially when it's the depository.
But currently, our investment policy that the council has approved, which I've been looking at very carefully, it says that you only buy AA-rated bonds, the way it is today. Is that
That's correct, but I reported this, shall we say, deficiency, as the mayor indicated, and I believe that the law, unless the city attorney has another opinion, I think the law and certainly our audit commission felt the important issue was the reporting of the variation or deviation from policy. But it certainly doesn't break the constitutional requirement. Okay. Which, as you probably know, is A rating.
Okay, so I understand that you reported. I didn't know that you reported it until the mayor just spoke. So I'm asking these questions not knowing that. But it is true that you purchased these, but in violation of what we currently have, even though you did report it, correct?
It is not in sync with what we have. That's correct.
Okay. The thing that I want to ask about is, in our document, what I'm questioning is, Mr. Jeffries, is you signed saying you certified that these all followed our policy, correct, in the documents that we have?
I'm certain that I did.
Okay. And when did you sign this?
Probably after the 25th of June.
Okay. After you purchased the security that was
yes,
not following policy.
But I signed that after I reported the deviation from policy, which I fully feel and has vetted this with the Audit Commission and the mayor. Okay. That the key issue from my responsibility is the reporting of it.
Okay. What are the maturity dates of these two investments?
The Wells obligation matures on the 15th of June in 2011. Bank of America is I'm reversing that. The Wells is 10/15 of 11, and the B of A is 6/5 of 2012.
Since these don't follow our policy, what can you do to get rid of these without causing extra cost to the city of Tustin?
None.
You're not going to?
In my opinion, these are virtually as good as gold. It was my recommendation to the mayor that they be held to maturity. They are of good value, and I see no impairment in their principal.
Okay. When did you learn that these were in violation of the policy?
I knew it at the time when I bought them.
Okay.
It was my full intention, which I did, was to report the deviation, and having done that, later correct the policy.
Okay. And when you learned this, you told the city manager?
As the mayor said, I informed him, the city manager, chair of the audit commission, and of course I spoke to our finance director immediately.
Would it be possible in the future, if you'd be so kind, since this is such an important part of what we do, to inform all the council members, since many of us didn't know about this till just today?
I suppose if directed by council, I could make that such a report.
Okay. And I guess the question I have is if you had made this mistake and you known you made the mistake, what I was looking for in this report was to state that you'd made the mistake and what you had done in it instead of signing it incorrectly is what I was looking for. So as we sit here now, are there any other investments on this report or that we own that are in violation of the current policy that you know of?
I don't believe so.
Okay. I guess that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay. You're welcome.
I have a question for Mr. Houston, please. For the city manager, I think we need to look into this a little bit more, at the very least, that on the report that we get on a quarterly basis, if you would be so kind, to at least give us the ratings of the notes and the bonds, because in order to find what this was, it took a lot of work. And so in the statement that we get, because what's happened with these is they've changed names. So when they showed up on our first quarterly statement, they showed up as different names that they show up in the report that we have now. They actually show up, so it's the average citizen, there's no way they could discern to find this. They show up on the report that we received on July 2nd. They show up as a Wells Fargo and a Bank of America. And then when we get this report, they show up differently. It's confusing. It'd be very helpful if we had on the report to add an item to add that it has the ratings of the notes on it as well. That would be very, very helpful. And then what I'd like to recommend is if we can amend the first page of the policy, the investment policy, to include that all the investments, the first page is the intent of the City Council that all deposits and investment activities authorized by the policy shall be, it currently reads, at the sole discretion of the City Treasurer as to the selection and appropriateness. What I'd like to add is we have a fiduciary responsibility to have oversight, to review it. And I'd like to see if we can add the following, that it says, with the oversight of the City Council. I think that's really important as well.
Anything else?
Give me a moment. Please. And the other comment that I have is why I looked into this. What was really interesting was I looked into it when I saw that it was a B of A note. I guess that's what concerned me the most was when I saw that we bought a B of A note, and I have a Wall Street Journal article that was written that Bank of America was under a memorandum of understanding, an MOU as it's called. And you were aware of that, correct, when you purchased it?
It's probably under several, with some of the grilling that the CEO has been taking,
Okay.
Madam.
So I think that's what concerned me. I think, Mr. Jeffries, what got my attention all of a sudden is I'd seen that and I had read this, U.S. regulators to Bank of America. And the order was imposed in early May prior to you buying it. And that's what kind of set off my red flags.